Struggle 2020 here, and today we're going to be doing Diluc versus Tartag. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. Anyways, let's get right into the video. Alright, to start this off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you everything that I've said about Diluc and then Tartag. So here's how I'm going to do this in specific order. I'm going to say everything about Tartag first, and then I'm going to work my way to Diluc later. So let's get right into it. After Nervalet and the travel encountered the all-devouring whale, they said that it came from the stars. We don't know if they mean literal stars. There are many things pointing to the fact that it might be, considering the traveler themselves isn't from Devant and is from another world. So if they say that it can devour everything into that, you could say that the whale is high continental or planetary. Nervalet casually one-shot Child as he was transforming in the Foul Legacy form. You could say that Nervalet is stronger than Foul Legacy Child without his vision and only his delusion, stronger than Foul Legacy with the vision, or stronger than just his delusion with or without the vision, and not Foul Legacy, because he didn't fully transform. Either way, Child eventually became too tired to fight the whale, and had been fighting it for several days on end, meaning Child should scale to the whale at some point before we see him again, but the whale has gotten so strong that he can no longer fend it off. This line quick line of scaling for Tartag and Nervalet. Child without his delusion seemed to not bother Nervalet, but as he began to charge into Foul Legacy, Nervalet felt like he had to intervene himself. He probably felt that once transformed, Child would be too much of a problem to handle or would endanger Farina. This is without his vision. So as of 4.2, he is stronger than he was when we first fought him in Leeway. Because of the scaling, we can say full power Child is Archon level, and scales closer to A in Zhongli than he did before. After going through the dialogue of Zhongli's interactions with Child, though he feels like he can deal with him comfortably, he admits that he may pose a massive problem in the future. This may be me looking too far into things, but considering the few times he's actually gotten involved with an issue, they were usually outrageous and abnormal situations that would require his aid in order to survive or get the job done. Ajaha is a good example of this, along with the events of the Chasm with Arataki Ito, Kuki, Yolan, and Yanfei. If he felt like he'd need to get directly involved with Child, that means that from the events of Leeway in 1.0, he was already either this strong or approaching this level of power. So as of right now, I can say that he and the Traveler are equals because of the scaling. By the way, if the Fatui are going against Celestia, they most likely won't rely on power from them. This is evident when Child is okay with giving his vision away, and he saw no power decrease because he was using a delusion. To add some context onto why he did this, for some reason, the vision lost all its power, and he could no longer use it anymore. So he gave it to the Traveler for safekeeping, and only relied on his delusion and physical strength. This also means he doesn't need his vision to enter the Foul Legacy state. This may mean at some point, Child might ditch his vision entirely for the delusion when they actually make their move against Celestia, if that's what they're doing. Delusions. Delusions are as powerful as visions. They seem to be powered the same. We also see things like Child's Foul Legacy form. Stronger delusion users seem to not be affected as much as normal ones, like we saw with Tepe and Diluc's father. That, or theirs was manufactured better, with less drawbacks, intentional or not. Let's talk about how the whale was defeated. Nervalet, in the cutscene before his battle with the whale, said that he was going to separate the primordial sea from the whale and then beat the whale, which is him depowering the whale and then beating it. So the whale, technically, for at least the Traveler, was weakened. So the Traveler had the luxury of fighting a weakened whale. As for Tartag, he didn't have that luxury. He fought the full power of the whale for at least 3 days straight. Now, do I think that Tartag directly scales to both the power of Nervalet and the Traveler combined? No, absolutely not. How I feel that his scaling works is that he scales closer to the Traveler than Nervalet, but he's above the Traveler in terms of power. And this makes sense when you consider that Tartag considers the Traveler a rival, so he's constantly training to beat the Traveler, not just to perform his duties, but to actually vanquish him because he's a warrior. Now let's talk about the Fatui. The Fatui constantly has Archon scaling thrown about at them throughout the story. In Mondstadt, one of the Fatui guarding the hotel thinks that Tartag by himself is capable of taking down Dvalin and is constantly gassing him up. When you consider that Senora is above Tartag in number, and you could technically equate that to her power, considering that he's her subordinate, that would mean that she too would be able to take on Dvalin. So she herself has Archon level scaling. Now we go to Inazuma, Yamiko, and the Wanderer. They make a deal. Yamiko gives up the Gnosis, the Wanderer lets the Traveler go free. In the cutscene after the Raiden Shogun is defeated, it is stated that the Wanderer is above Senora, and Yamiko did not want to fight him. Now you could take this as a couple things. One, Yamiko just did not want to fight him, or two, she actually thought that he might be able to win against her, because she knows the lore behind him, how he was meant to be like a prototype for the Raiden Shogun. And even though Yamiko herself has Raiden Shogun scaling thanks to her lore, this does not mean that she would be able to beat the Wanderer, considering that he himself has scaling to the Raiden Shogun because of his initial purpose of being the prototype for the Shogun. Then you go to Sumeru, and Nahida is literally handling the doctor like he's a bomb waiting to go off. She over and over says that the doctor scales to Archons in terms of power, and she does not want to fight him without the Traveler. Now to be fair, Nahida, in terms of AP, she is lacking. She has stated this herself. But regardless, she directly compared the Doctor to the power of an Archon. So that's Archon level scaling to him. So when you consider that Tartag was enlisted in a group like this, that would mean that he would have roundabout scaling to all of these people one way or another. There is no way that Tartag in the Wanderer has not gone at it at any point. There's a whole bunch of things that I can say. There are many other methods that I can use to scale Tartag to Archons, but I want to do that in a specific video dedicated for the Fatui and not here. So moving on to Diluc and his scaling. But first, I need to talk about a statement that Ningguang made during the Osayo fight. She described the event of his release on the level of a cataclysm. A cataclysm is a large-scale and violent event in the natural world. We're only paying attention to that first one. Some synonyms that I found for cataclysm was calamity and apocalypse. And in both calamity and apocalypse, natural disasters and earthquakes are prime examples of this. We also have things as a nuclear holocaust, zombie apocalypse, alien invasion, and so on and so forth. Alright, so now let's go back to Mondstadt during the Dvalin fight. I counted 9 structures that were being held up by the wind. These structures were made of stone and were about the size of a building. Category 5 hurricanes are known for flattening buildings, not lifting them so high in the air they go into the stratosphere and are just floating around. These winds could possibly be moving over 2,000 miles per hour. To put that into perspective, the planet Neptune has winds that exceed 1,500 miles per hour, faster than the speed of sound. In the Google image that you should be seeing on screen right now, you should be seeing where it says that a fully developed hurricane can output about 10 megatons every 20 minutes. It did not specify what kind of hurricane that was. So you could say that a category 1 hurricane could output this amount of energy. Or you could say a category 5 could output this amount of energy. It's not specific. The winds of hurricanes are known to be 250 miles per hour, not even close to what's on Neptune. Even though Osayo was strong, he didn't produce these kinds of winds. Also, Dvalin was weakened because of that zit on the back of his head, slowly poisoning him and killing him. it was making him go mad, so he was basically throwing his strength around at the same time, tiring him more. So technically this is the bare minimum we can get for Dvalin's power in terms of scaling, because he's nerfed and he should be exhausted at this point. Yet he's still able to passively create 1,000 mile per hour winds, meaning we can scale Dvalin above Osile. Dvalin is the right hand of the animal Archon, which means we should be able to scale him to Ajaha and vice versa. So what we just said for Dvalin, we can apply this to Ajaha. To remove the Zent on the back of Dvalin's head, the Traveler would have to physically fight and knock out Dvalin, alongside everyone else there. During the boss battle, it is implied that Diluc, Venti, the Traveler, and Jean are capable of temporarily knocking out Dvalin. So the Traveler would scale at most to 1/4 of the power that this weakened Dvalin had at that time, considering there were 3 other people besides the Traveler. So why are we talking about tornadoes and calamities? During the Dvalin fight, the Traveler would have to be able to fight against the 1,000 mile per hour winds and fight Dvalin. So his physical strength would scale to that, along with his elemental power at this point of the story. And the proof of this, during the Osile fight, everyone there put all their energy into the Traveler and then into the Jade Chamber and launched it at Osile. The resulting explosion didn't just come from the Jade Chamber, but from everyone else there. Later on, when you get to Inazuma, it is stated that the Raiden Shogun is able to control storms across all 4 corners of the earth. At the beginning of the story, there was a massive self-sustaining storm that capsized most ships and made it nearly impossible for anyone to leave. Considering that Diluc, the Traveler, and Venti, along with Jean, fought Dvalin, it is safe to say that they all scaled to each other at the time of Mondstadt. They all have roundabout scaling to Venti. Regardless of what Venti says, he still should be at least low to mid island level. He has to be in order to fight Dvalin. It makes no sense that he is the weakest Archon, yet he is still able to fight Dvalin. Therefore, you can say that Jean, the Traveler, and Diluc all together scales to low tier Archons, because Venti himself is a low tier Archon. If you want to take what I said about scaling to 1/4 the amount of energy that was used to take down Dvalin, in terms of megatons, Diluc would be 65.7 in one single blast, or his dawn. And Jean, along with Venti and the Traveler at the time of Mondstadt, would scale to this. If not, there's another way you can look at this. Venti and Diluc are the only ones there that had the highest range ability. And if you want to think of this like in an animated cutscene, that would mean that Diluc and Venti were the 2 people who would knock down Dvalin out of the sky, so that all 4 of them could wail on the zip that was on the back of his head. So in terms of how much of the pie, or the 1/4 pie, Diluc takes up, he and Venti would technically take up more of it than both Jean and the Traveler, even though they all scale to each other. Regardless of what Venti says, it doesn't make sense that he's the weakest Archon, yet he's still able to fight with Dvalin, even in his weakened state. So he still has to be at least mid to low island level at the time of Mondstadt. However, I think it's safe to say that Diluc, the Traveler, and Jean all scaled below Venti. In fact, at the end of the fight, during the cutscene, it shows Diluc, Jean, and the Traveler all just chilling on Dvalin, while Venti is literally fighting himself, trying not to pass out. So you can interpret that as Venti trying harder than everyone else there, along with everything else that I said before. Before we continue on, we need to talk about visions versus delusions. On the wiki, it states that delusions are far more powerful than visions. Now, I went to ChatGPT to determine how much powerful, and the 2 of us settled on that delusions are 5 to 10 times more powerful than visions. So if I were to allow Diluc to use his delusion, which is what I plan to do, by the way, that would mean that Diluc would be 5 to 10 more powerful than what he is now. Also, I looked into Foul Legacy to determine what type of buff it gives. It basically says that it allows Tartag to use both his delusion and his vision at the same time. So it's the buff that the vision gives him and the buff that the delusion gives him stacked on top of each other and not multiplied. What's up guys, Drago2020 here. If the audio sounds weird or messed up or anything like that, that's because I'm recording this after I did everything. I said something totally wrong about Foul Legacy, so I'm just gonna go over here and correctly go over it right now. Like I said earlier, Foul Legacy gives Tartag armor and it increases his durability. It is stated that Foul Legacy is separate from both the vision and the delusion. Foul Legacy is its own buff. I'm gonna give Foul Legacy the same type of multiplier I gave the delusion, and that is a 5 to 10 times buff on top of everything else. Now that we got this out of the way, let's move on to the rest of the video. Alright, round 1. So here's the scenario that both characters are going to be, and it's quite simple. It's how the Traveler met Tartag and they fought. That's the same exact place, the exact same time frame, everything. The only difference is, in place of the Traveler, it's Diluc. Now, there's a couple ways to look at this. One, consider that the Traveler, when he gets elements, he only gets slightly stronger. And if you believe that the Traveler outputted 1/4 of the amount of energy used to take down Dvalin, then that means that Diluc wins this fight based off of that. If you think that the Traveler is, I wouldn't say much stronger, but stronger enough to where it would be significantly stronger than his previous, then you could say that this is a lot more of an even fight, considering that the Traveler wasn't exhausted after beating Tartag in the first place. In fact, you could even say that Diluc wins because of that, because the Traveler went on to fight Osial, and with the help of everyone else there, one-shot Osial with the use of the Jade Chamber, which was powered up by everyone there, including the Traveler. Now, keep this in mind. Diluc in this fight, in every fight after this, is going to be buffed, because Diluc is fighting a Fatui Harbinger, and the Fatui sold his father his delusion, which backfired on him and killed him. So it would make sense that Diluc would feel extra passionate about winning this, so he would be slightly buffed. So if you take into account what I said before about Diluc still somewhat scaling to the Traveler, even though he has one extra element than he did when he fought Dvalin, then you could still say that Diluc wins this fight. Now, there's another way you can look at this, and that is what visions the two have, or what elements they control. And that is, Tartag, he controls Hydro and Electro, and Diluc only controls Pyro for both delusions and the vision. Last time I checked, fire is put out by water, so that means that Diluc would technically be at a disadvantage. But here's the thing, Tartag, he likes to fight up close with his close range weapons, so that means that he's going to be using his blades, very similar to a skill. And if you know anything about elemental reactions, once a reaction occurs, it removes both elements. So that means if Diluc infuses his sword with Pyro and strikes at Tartag, what's going to happen is Diluc's sword is going to remain and Tartag's swords are not. So technically, yes, Diluc is at a disadvantage, but it can be mitigated through this technicality. Now at a range, things are a little bit different. With his Hydro Vision, I feel like Tartag, he should be able to contend with Diluc a lot easier than he would be at close range because of the aforementioned reason. But keep in mind that Diluc, he's no slouch when it comes to long range. In fact, Dawn is long range, close, mid, and long range. Now, also keep in mind this, that ability or that attack that his father used, Diluc used a similar attack to this during the manga to try and impersonate the Black Fire. So he has an ability to hold down Tartag at a range. Now, I do know that this was done with his delusion, but keep in mind that everything that's done with the delusion can be done with the vision. It's just the delusion is much more powerful. That's it. The delusion in both cases for Tartag and Diluc will not be giving them extra abilities aside from what abilities they assigned to that particular vision or delusion. Tartag likes to remain mobile at a range, so Diluc chaining him up would actually be very detrimental, because even though Tartag, he has a Hydro vision and Diluc has a Pyro vision, and Hydro clashing with Pyro, Hydro's going to win most of the time, right? Well, even with that, in terms of AP, Tartag is at a significant disadvantage, because as I detailed before, delusions are 5 times to 10 times more powerful than vision. So if you feel like that with Tartag's delusion, he was closer to the Traveler than he was with his vision, that means that Tartag with his Hydro vision is 5 to 10 times weaker than the Traveler or Diluc in terms of AP. In terms of speed, I'd say they're around the same. In fact, you could say that Tartag is faster because he has those movement abilities both with Electro and Hydro, where he slides around the battlefield to get to different parts of the arena. So with what I just said, at a range, here's what I think is most likely to happen. Tartag, he's going to release most of his ranged abilities, and Diluc is going to release all of his. They're going to clash. Diluc is going to beat out his because there's not enough power within the Hydro to nullify Diluc's attack. And it's just going to turn to steam, and whatever abilities that Tartag sends Diluc's way is going to vaporize, and Diluc's attacks is going to keep going towards Tartag. So Tartag's going to have no choice but to create that Hydro barrier and go and use his Electro delusion. Once this happened, I feel like the fight's a lot more even, but still, I don't see Tartag winning unless he goes into Foul Legacy, which he will inevitably do. And once he goes into Foul Legacy, that is when things start to heat up. With Foul Legacy, both the delusion and the vision are buffed, and I don't see Diluc damaging Tartag at a range. At close range, I feel like Diluc should be able to damage Tartag. But the problem is, before, Tartag didn't necessarily have the AP in order to drown out Diluc's attacks, and now he does. We could very easily enter a scenario where Diluc is just unable to damage Tartag, and that would result in a eventual loss in Tartag's favor. Now, the only way to get around this is if Diluc used his delusion in this case, in which I feel like should be a one-shot, because consider this, Tartag already has used his delusion, and now he's going into Foul Legacy, which drains him even further. So even though Diluc's delusion, it should drain him just as much, he's just starting to use it, and he was already relative to Tartag in terms of AP and damage number, and it gets multiplied by 5 to 10 times. So I feel like once Diluc starts using his delusion, it's just going to spiral out of control for Tartag, because he won't have the endurance to fight Diluc anymore. And Diluc, in terms of number, should scale higher than Tartag. Now, there is a movement ability that Tartag has that I didn't mention earlier, and that's teleportation. Even though the Traveler seemed to get around this pretty easily, there is a scenario where Diluc wears himself out trying to hit Tartag, and Tartag is teleporting all over the place, right? But as I said before, Tartag should be, in terms of stamina, weakened, so he should be coming out of Foul Legacy as he did in the story, at least at this point. So it's safe to say that there is a very high chance that Tartag would be able to overcome Diluc because of the elemental advantage, but you could also say that at this point Tartag, he won't have the stamina to continue to fight anymore. Those two scenarios are very likely to happen. But the one that I feel like is the most likely to happen is the one where Tartag runs out of Foul Legacy, Diluc just goes in and steamrolls, which is what happened with the Traveler. It's just going to be a higher difficulty. In conclusion, I feel like Diluc should take this, whether he has a vision or not. For Diluc, I feel like he should take this with like 8 out of 10 difficulty, and Tartag, he should take this with 10 out of 10 difficulty if he does win. Because believe it or not, in spite of everything I said in terms of AP, Tartag does have the means to defeat Diluc and render his attacks ineffective. So, moving on to round 2. Alright, round 2. So here's the setting for this fight. Tartag is going to be under the same restrictions when he was arrested and then taken to the court of Fontaine. So he's not going to have his hydro vision, but he will have his electro delusion and foul legacy. Tartag, even after losing his vision, he was still able to maintain relevance to both Nervalet and the Traveler. Tartag, he fought the whale for at least 3 days with just his delusion and foul legacy, implying that Tartag, with both his delusion and foul legacy, he's become so proficient with it to where the downsides of it have been minimized. This means 2 things. Tartag is physically more powerful, and in terms of AP, is way more powerful than he was in Leeway. So Diluc with his vision is not going to fly anymore. He's going to have to use his delusion. So how strong is Delusion Diluc? Well, Delusion Diluc, he is 5 to 10 times more powerful than he was when he fought the Fallen. If you think that Diluc outputted 1/4 of the amount of energy necessary to take down the Fallen, that would mean Delusion Diluc is 20% more powerful than the amount of energy used to take down the Fallen. Bare minimum. That's only if you use the 5 times multiplier. If you use the 10 times multiplier, then that means that Delusion Diluc is twice as powerful as the amount of energy used to take down the Fallen. That means Delusion Diluc, in terms of AP and power, scales closer to Zhongli and Venti. Keep in mind that Zhongli, he thought that his power would be required to defeat Tartag in the future, if any problems arise. So with the prior scaling in mind that I just brought up, with Diluc being able to solo Dvalin by himself, that would mean that Diluc would be able to defeat Tartag, just like Zhongli would be able to. Now, also keep in mind that Tartag, even though he's stronger here, he's still going to be nerfed. He doesn't have his hydro vision. And if you remember in the last fight, he had it and it actually kind of helped him out a little bit here, but that's not going to be present. So with that in mind, I think it's safe to say that Delusion Diluc does beat Tartag, and I do feel like he beats him easier than he did in the Leeway situation. So round 2 goes to Diluc as well. Alright, now going into round 3, which is Tartag having everything. His hydro vision and his electro delusion. He is more powerful because now he has everything. And because without his vision and only his delusion and foul legacy, he was able to maintain relevancy to the Traveler, specifically Hydro Traveler. Now that he has his vision, he should be more powerful. How much more powerful would Tartag be than he was when he only had his delusion? The answer to that is Hydro Vision plus his electro delusion plus whatever foul legacy gives him. And the same would go for Diluc, because now they're both going to be using their visions and their delusions at the same time. Diluc, he won't have foul legacy, so he won't have that special armor, unless that suit that you can get with crystals is like armor in its own way. But besides that, he won't have armor. That does put Diluc at a severe disadvantage, believe it or not. Tartag, he now has the thing that can nullify Diluc's attacks, even though they should be around equals now. And that again is his Hydro Vision. Now, I want you guys to remember this when I say what I'm about to say next. Visions actually offer resistances to negative effects. Remember in the Chasm, a big thing that was going around is that vision users are able to be around Shao a lot more often because of this resistance buff. So Tartag, with his vision and delusion working together during Foul Legacy, he should now, with his increased stamina, with his delusion and Foul Legacy, on top of having his vision, which should increase his longevity a lot more. I don't see Diluc coming on top here because the power is more. He has everything to withstand Diluc's attacks now. And Diluc, he should be rusty with his delusion, even though it should function around the same as his vision. He's not as acquainted with it as he was back then, where he spammed it often. Versus Tartag, he feels like they're interchangeable. So the final round goes to Tartag. So this leaves us with Diluc 2 and Tartag 1. So overall, Diluc took more of this fight than Tartag did. But at the end of the day, if you want to go actual in-game full power versus in-game full power, Tartag should beat Diluc more than Diluc beats Tartag, at least currently. Unless they release something where Diluc built his own suit to mirror Foul Legacy because he heard of Tartag in defensive leeway, or he gets sucked into the abyss and fights with Skirt and learns it from her. I don't see Diluc winning against Tartag at all in the future, even if he has this delusion, which he most likely won't have. So that's my take on the fight, or at least round 3. Alright guys, that's gonna do it. My next video, quite honestly, I don't know what it's gonna be. It could be a Mona video, it could be a Yamiko video, Raiden Shogun, Zhongli, it can be quite literally anything. So stay tuned, see what I got coming up for you in the future, and as always,